Hey everybody, welcome to the episode. We are doing a special episode today where we do not have a guest coming in, but we do have a guest. I wanted to interview Lauren on her new book, Occam's Dream. She started writing with Death
Definitely.
Walking, I'm going to get this right, Walking London's Horror History, which is probably the book I read last year, and then now has the book, Occam's Dream. And that was released earlier this year. Hey, Lauren, just wanted to talk to you and see how you're doing. How's the book going?
Hey, thanks. It's going really well. When we're recording this, it's almost been its first month, which is really exciting. And it was so much fun to have out there. I got to do like a little book event where some friends came, about 30 people came with some friends, some people I didn't know, which was really exciting, and talk about it. And then I've basically just been, watching it, hoping people have liked it. You read it and I think you liked it, which means a lot.
I read it in like 3 days, which for me, I mean, you know me growing up, like that's good. There was no Curious George spot hidden firm or the store. It was like actual characters and stories. So I loved it. I thought it was really good.
Thank you. I've been really lucky. Everybody who's given me feedback or put feedback online has said that they were like really able to read it really fast and like got into it. And I think that's the best because it's no, it's not a big book, but like even if you're reading like sort of shorter novella stuff, sometimes it's you have to like be in the right mind frame. It's like takes it out of you to read. And I'm very pleased that's not what I did. I wanted it to be fun and interesting and hopefully mysterious. I think a lot of people liked the mystery.
Yeah, I definitely didn't. I definitely was hooked onto that very quickly and trying to figure it out. You know, when you read, or well, now that I'm a reader, but when you watch things and you're reading, you know, you're trying to be like, oh, it's this, and then you're trying to like almost formulate a decision based on what you think it is, as opposed to like what all the facts are. You know,
Mm.
at least I do. I'll be like, I have a preconceived notion of what I think's going on, and then you like try to figure out how it matches. How do I get to that point? Where then you're like, oh, it was over here, and then like you know. But no, I thought I did a really good job of that. I mean,
Thank
I really, really well done.
Thank you so much. It was been a lot to me. You said this, and a couple other people have on online, and then on Heather's Bookshelf was the first like formal interview that I or not interview review that somebody did. And she'd said it was like Black Mirror like, and then a couple other people you as well have said it's Black Mirror like. And I have to say that was like the coolest compliment because you're right. I'm that person that I'm watching the movie or reading the book and I'm like, right, I'm gonna figure it out before the detective should or before the whatever. I want to be able to figure out the twist. And it's actually it's funny. Tony and I've been watching Tales from the Crypt, and very often Tales from the Crypt does the like twist at the end. And he doesn't want to know, but he's like, when do you think you have it figured out? How early in the thing? And I like just lift my hand, I'm like, I think I figured it out. He's like, really? I was like, yeah. And I really didn't want that to happen. I wanted to write one where even I would be like, oh, I think I know what this is. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know what this is, and then be totally wrong at the end.
Up until like the last, if I'm, till like the last page, I was kind of like, oh, like so. Yeah, it kind of had me going. It did. It had me kind of different, thinking different things and really kind of now starting to be like, well, no, let's see what it is. Like, like wanting to figure out where it was because it was like, I think this, and then I'll think this. And then I'm like, let's just keep going, like as you're supposed to do with books and stories. But I kind of, I've never been the person that reads the last chapter first or the last page first, goes back. But like, I wanted to get to the end, but I had to get through the other pages first. It was very good. But one of the things reason I wanted to do just a quick interview with you, just so people could kind of hear a little bit more about the book. But we were just talking our normal conversation, not on the pod, but you had mentioned that you had started writing this book when you were living in California.
Mhm. Yeah.
I wanted to just ask you and pick your brain a little bit, like how long has Occam's Dreams been in the works, like in your brain?
So 2016, 2016, so almost 10 years, which is
Wow.
crazy. It started out as a short story though. So when I was in California, I was working at a bookstore, and it got me into writing again, and because I hadn't since school, and I started writing short stories because it's a nice easy way to like ease into writing again and stuff like that. And I'd written a couple other ones, and they sort of seemed good, and I started out with this idea for Occam's Dream because I wasn't working in the tech world, but I was near a lot of the tech world. A lot of the people that came into the bookstore worked at like Google, which Palo Alto wasn't very far, or worked at Apple. And so I got kind of into the idea of, because I loved sci-fi growing up anyway, into the idea of like something with the tech world, because it's so and I'm not the first person to do it, but it's so drink the Kool-Aid. It's like a almost cult like, and so it's fascinating and fun. And so it started out as a short story, and then I couldn't make it like work as a short story. There was too much going on. And so I then started writing it bigger, and then basically what happened is Deathlines got suggested as I'd moved back to London. I was doing the tours, and Deathlines got picked up as a book, and so then I focused on Deathlines, and I was doing nonstop London horror stuff, and it was so much fun, but it's totally absorbing because you have to rewatch all the films, make sure you have the right corner and the right bits, and you want to, even though I was giving the walks, when it's a book you want to give a lot more information, because when you're at a stop you want to be like, oh, I'll give 1 to 2 minutes so you guys don't get bored. But in a book you can give a lot more information, so I'd like rewatch stuff, I'd re-research stuff, and so it kind of was put on the back burner for a few years because then COVID happened, and that nobody was paying attention to anything they were doing. I think not just me. I was mostly just going like, what is going on?
Yeah.
But then once COVID settled and I was like home and bored a lot, I was like, oh yeah, there was like this short story I was kind of writing and I really liked. And so I revisited it. So weirdly, it gave me that space to revisit it because you kind of stuck at your home, so you don't have as much inspiration. So I went back to old stories. And yeah, and then it turned into Occam's Dream. So it was like from concept to final has been almost 10 years, but there was that kind of 2.5, 3 year break in there for Deathlines to happen.
Right. Were you originally? I know you said that you couldn't do short story, but and it needed to be a little longer. Was novella like this the next step, or did you like what made you choose novella over like a full on like I'm gonna write the next great sci-fi novel? Like I had not heard novella before we started talking about this book when you were talking, so I learned something new with that. But like, what made you choose one over the other?
So it's a bit funny actually. I at first when I fleshed it out for a short story and I knew it could needed to be longer, I thought it might be a novella because I really liked Philip K. Dick's stuff, and he did these like 60s and 70s short sci-fi novellas, and that's where you got Blade Runner from, Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, and he did like the Foundation series, which I love. And you've got other novellas that other sci-fi writers were writing at the time, so you get quite a lot of these really short things, and it's nice because it had this big history in sci-fi.
Right.
But weirdly enough, at one point I started writing it even longer, and then I realized it actually wasn't getting better for being longer. I was just adding in, basically I was trying to make it like as complex as possible, but sometimes that's not fun to read or worth
Enough.
doing. So it got up to like 60,000 words at one point, and I was like, no, actually, this is a way worse book than the 40. And so I cut it right back down. So yeah, so it's kind of it wasn't that it was always going to be a novella, but because I'd read quite a lot of sci-fi novellas, it was always an option. And then that's kind of what made where the story fit best, where I thought the story was the most interesting.
Well, yeah, you had mentioned that novella and like something like this is really good. The tube book, right? It's like you're on the tube, you're doing your daily commute, and it's like, hey, I can pick up and read for 30 minutes while I'm waiting for my stops, and I don't have to like. I know how it is in England. No one wants to look at anybody, acknowledge anybody. Like, how many million people, and it's like where I'm just here by myself, so you can just go in your book and you don't have to like acknowledge anything that's going on the. But
It's the best.
do you have plans to do more of these? Do you have plans to make this?
Ooh.
You know, personally, I could see like this having more of a story to it. Like
Mhm.
there, it's a great standalone story in my eyes. Great sci-fi, great like what's going on. But now it's like, but now I want to know, like, there's just I don't want to give anything away for any, for people that don't read it, but like, do I want to go this direction, this direction, this direction? Like you really, it's a story that you can expound on I would think fairly easily.
Yeah, definitely. I am. So I mentioned Asimov's Foundation series. He'd sort of set up this idea in Foundation where you could you naturally jumped a certain number of years ahead of time each time because it was about projecting into the future. And so the book worked on its own, but he kind of set himself up well to do something else. And I a bit did that, but I did it in kind of I hope an interesting way. So I hope this doesn't give anything away, but it's not necessary that you'd want like the sequel, what would happen next. You could do, and like you could start from the last page and then what happens the next page, as it were. But you have different directions in time that you could go. You've got different leaps you could make. For me, I'm always would I don't want to give anything away, but I would always be really interested in telling the story a story that came chronologically before the story that you would get in Occam's Dream, which if you've read it will make a lot of sense. If you haven't read it, I've just confused the heck out of you. But that was the one that I always was like, well, if it does well and if people like it and they want it, that would be the story I would write, is one of the characters' backstories, as it were.
Yeah, that I agree, and I agree, and I don't even know exactly what you're talking about, but it's like I I was invested enough that I have questions that I want to know what are these characters, the company, like this, there was really there's nothing. Let me make sure I'm not going to blow this. Yes, I want to make sure it was on the back
It
cover
is.
about the desert. Like I want more. There's so much more that you're like, when I watch something, anything on TV, especially if it's like historical or something I can look up. Like sometimes I'll be like watching it, but then I'll be googling at the same time, right? Like, oh, what is that? Like, so when I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, well, in my head, my brain's like, what about the desert? Like, what about this? And then you want to go deeper dive, right? And so yeah, I think you have it's almost like a spoke of like here's the centerpiece, Occam's Dream, but like there's there are different directions that could go where, like you said, it's not like book. The second story is the next page. Like you could go do tons of different things, which I think is a really good. Just makes it interesting, right? Like it just makes reader, or at least to me as a reader, and not even like a very big reader, but like it just makes it like, oh man, that's really cool. Like, what does this do? What about this? What?
Yeah.
So I think it's really good. I don't know how your brain works that way,
Thank you. I'm not sure. It's a happy accident, honestly. But I think the thing is I love the idea of like the world. And so
yeah,
I wrote a story in the world, but like hopefully if other people get into it as well, I'll be able to kind of write more in that world because it's one I'd love to go back to, if you know what I mean. Like you
well, yeah,
said, you can do the desert, you can do Swan, you can do Rob, you can do any of the other characters you could get really into.
maybe not. Maybe, and I'll blank on his name because we all know at this point whoever's watches our, or listens to our podcast, I butcher every character's name. It doesn't happen, but the guy who's the IT security guy.
Yeah, no, Rob's the comic relief for sure.
Yeah,
He's great, but he's not.
yeah, there's not a whole lot of depth in like you don't necessarily need. I'll read that book if you write it, but if you do his backstory, I'll probably more skim.
Yeah.
There's not much depth. There's a lot more depth in the other characters.
No, you're totally right. I think weirdly enough, if I did with the other ones, they could kind of have their own story without any other similar characters. I mean, Jill and Mackenzie are married, so they'd probably end up coming, but you could do a whole story on any of the other ones where totally new cast. Rob, you couldn't, but I think it'd be really funny as like a sequel because by the end, Rob still doesn't know the truth. Rob figuring it out might be quite funny because he's like so bonkers and he's so Mr. Conspiracy that he could like end up there's a joke in the book and it's a little one-liner, but that he'd like basically shut down an entire company and got the world to boycott it because they'd changed their app color to purple. And it turned out they did it because very few apps are purple, so they thought they would stand out. But he thought it was like this big conspiracy and halted everything to the ground. So you can see him like running Swan into the ground trying to figure this out.
No, that's great. I had one more question, and I told you it wasn't going to be a super long interview, but I am curious. So I read this. I read this not knowing that you started the book in conceptual phases, but in California, finishing it over there. And as I was reading it, I'm picturing possibly Northern California or Pacific Northwest. And maybe that's because of the IT setting, just very IT focused with Microsoft and Amazon being in Washington State or just, and like the ocean that is described very early on of where she lives. And you had mentioned Cornwall, I believe, that's where it's
Yeah.
Cornwall coast there.
Yeah.
When you started writing it, did you have a specific place in mind that you were trying to kind of maybe, and it's not even a huge deal, but I'm just curious about because we were talking, you said they kind of do float back and like that's kind of very similar, the similar feels of the Pacific Northwest or like that Northern California coast north and then Cornwall. Did you have a place already set in your mind?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Of course, actually I get asked a lot because Deathlines is all about film locations. So of course I'm very location aware. But yeah, so when I wrote the short story, it was California was kind of the thing I was thinking about, and I think I kept elements of that. But when I started writing as a book, I thought a lot of it worked better being set in England, partly because of the way people socially interact. People aren't as chatty and aren't likely to give a whole lot of their emotions away, and that makes the story a lot stronger. So socially it worked better in England. And I where she lives, she trains into where she works, but where she lives is very much that kind of the I mentioned Cornwall in the book, and that's where Jill and Mackenzie kind of were, but she's in the Jurassic Coast, which is a bit in from Cornwall. But it's a mix of Seattle and the Jurassic Coast. So it's like a bit of both. And I did that kind of intentionally so that nobody would go, "Oh, I've been there," because you
Okay.
wouldn't.
Yeah.
But they have really similar landscapes. And actually, even Cornwall has that, the very cliff coasts of California. You get bits of that in parts of Cornwall. Some of it's the long, beautiful, but some of it's like the World's End looks quite a lot like the kind of cliffy coast. And so it's a kind of perfect thing to mesh over each other because a lot of the views are the same, a lot of the landscapes the same, the smaller towns. And so it's a kind of mix of those two.
Very cool. Yeah, it was just, it was one of the things that we talked about. I just, not that it was it's not even a huge thing of the book. It just was, especially when I learned that you started writing it in California. I'm like, I really, especially that area of Marin County, like I really was seeing more like that landscape because I haven't been to the coast that you're speaking of in Cornwall. So like in my, and you always kind of picture the characters and picture people in your head and places. And so it was interesting when you said, "Oh yeah, I started thinking about it as a short story in California." I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just very cool. So, but I wanted to thank you for just like letting me interview you. Sorry to our listeners because I'm not the best solo interviewer by any means, but I do like I wrote a review. I again want to give a different type of review here. I am not a reader. I mean, my bookcase is way more full. I guess you don't see it all the way over here. but these are the books that I've read, and it's kind of embarrassing for some of the people that we've talked to that write and like that have bookcases because I have a Joey Barton autobiography, and it
Nice.
might not be something that's on everybody's shelf, but I have a lot of like the autobiography stuff, and this I only put down because I'm falling asleep or I started reading it late at night, and it is an easy read, and if you have somebody that likes sci-fi or just likes kind of a mystery book um, or mystery story, you watch Black Mirror, you watch any kind of mystery. Heck, if you're a Dateline mystery person, there might not be like sex, lies, and murder, but it might, but if you just like that whodunit kind of thing at the end, give them this book because I think it's easy enough to read and like the mystery is there and keeps you enthralled. I think it might be almost like a gateway book, and then they're going to start wanting more books for like present because. So if they don't, like they might read it and be like, "Yeah, it was good. I'm not going to read anymore." But it really would. I think it could spark people into wanting to read more. It did me. I bought two more books after I read this book. Like so, bought something that I was more interested in, like, and one was a travel book. I think I showed you that one, but like we went to this like little haunted bookstore when we were in one of these small towns we were traveling to, and but it kind of got me in the mind of like, oh, I'm gonna go and read tonight instead of just flipping through the channels for an hour searching for entertainment. I'm like, oh, I have one right next to my bedstand, my nightstand.
That's
So
amazing.
pick this up for somebody in your life that doesn't read and see what happens.
Honestly, that's the coolest review and recommendation ever. Thank you. That's awesome.
I mean it. I mean it. No, I've told people I'm giving my copy because I purchased this copy on Amazon. You were nice enough to send me another copy, which I did receive in mail. But this is going to start getting passed around from
Yay!
friend group. I already have the first two people that want to see it, so I will hand it out this week, and then it will start making its rounds.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited about it. I hope people, are still purchasing it. And if nothing else, for my own selfishness, everyone go buy it so I can get a second story out of this.
Yeah, there you go. It's got you blackmailed.
If people really cared about me, they would buy more of this story.
I might have to just write it for you.
It's really bad. I really am not the guilt person. So like that,
Yeah.
that really felt very false for me. I'm not like, but me, what about me? But well, thank you, Lauren, and thank you, listeners, for indulging me in Occam's Dream. And seriously, go tell everybody where they can find the book.
Oh yes. So if you're an American listener, you can find it at Barnes and Noble or at the usual kind of online places. I know Amazon does it, but if you aren't an Amazon person, if you give it a Google, most of the like general bookseller stores, World of Books, that kind of thing will have it. Here in the UK, it's similar. You can get it at things like Foyles or Waterstones, or even WH Smith's has it, but just online, so you won't be able to grab it at a train station. But you can also get it on Amazon or any of your favorite places. Thank you so much again. This is
Yeah.
very cool.
And talk to you guys on our next episode.